The boxes were already packed. I had unpacked them. They were stacked neatly by the front door, my things, my clothes, a photo of me from childhood still in its frame, wrapped in garbage bags and stacked like they'd been ready for a while. My father was in the kitchen eating breakfast. My mother didn't look up from her phone. No one said anything. I stood there in my socks on Christmas morning, looking at my entire life reduced to 7 boxes, and neither of them spoke. My father poured more coffee. My mother scrolled. I said, "What is this?" My mother said, "We talked about it." We hadn't. I looked at the boxes. Then I looked at the front door. Then I looked at the 2 people who raised me. That's when I realized something was very wrong. Let me back up. I'm 29. I moved back home 14 months before that morning. Not because I was reckless, not because I failed, because my mother called me and said my father wasn't well and she needed help. I had an apartment. A stable job I could do remotely. I gave up both without being asked twice, because that's what family does. Also, I believed. The first few months were fine. Normal, even. I paid reduced rent. Their idea. I handled groceries twice a week, drove my father to his appointments, fixed things around the house. I was quiet. I stayed out of their space. I thought I was doing exactly what I was brought back to do. Then something shifted. It was small at first. The kind of small you convince yourself you're imagining. My mother started having long phone calls she'd end when I walked into the room. My father started asking me oddly specific questions. Did I have savings? Did I have anything in my name? Did I have a lease somewhere? I answered honestly every time. I didn't think anything of it. Then one evening I came downstairs late and heard my mother on the phone in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to listen. But I heard her say, "He doesn't know yet." I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. She lowered her voice. I couldn't catch the rest. I went back upstairs. The next morning she acted like nothing had happened. My father asked if I wanted eggs. My mother made a shopping list. Everything was completely normal, and that was the part that bothered me. I mentioned it to my younger sister that weekend. She lives across town, checks in occasionally. I told her what I'd heard. She said I was reading into it. She said Mom was probably on the phone with a neighbor. She said I'd always been a little paranoid, her words, not mine, and that I needed to relax. I didn't argue. But I noticed something when she said it. She didn't look surprised. Not even a little. She changed the subject fast. Too fast. I filed that away. Over the next 3 weeks, I paid closer attention. I started noticing paperwork left out on the kitchen table, then quickly gathered up when I entered. I noticed my mother visited their family lawyer twice. I know because she mentioned a dentist appointment, and I saw the lawyer's address on a sticky note she'd left near the phone. I didn't say a word. People who are guilty of something expect you to react. They're prepared for the argument, for the confrontation. What they're never prepared for is silence. So I stopped reacting. And I started watching. The document was in a manila envelope. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that. My mother had asked me to grab the car insurance papers from the filing cabinet in the study, the grey cabinet, second drawer, she said. I opened the second drawer. The insurance folder was there. So was something else. A tabbed legal document. Thick. Rubber-banded. My name was on the cover page. Not as a party to anything good. I didn't take it. I didn't move it. I stood there and I read what I could read standing up, in the 2 or 3 minutes I had before anyone would notice I'd taken too long. It was a formal occupancy termination notice, drafted by their lawyer, dated 6 weeks earlier. 6 weeks. While I was driving my father to his Thursday appointments. While I was paying for groceries on Tuesdays. While I was fixing the bathroom exhaust fan on a Saturday afternoon, because my mother said it was making a noise. The document stated that I was an informal occupant with no tenancy rights, that the property owners were exercising their right to reclaim full occupancy, and that I had been given, and I remember this phrase exactly, adequate informal notice through verbal communication. There had been no verbal communication. I put the insurance papers on the kitchen counter, said I found them, and went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. Then I opened my laptop. The house had always been complicated, inheritance-wise. My grandparents had built it. When they passed, it was left jointly, in a trust, between my mother and her brother, my uncle. My uncle had moved abroad years ago. He and my mother were not close. I knew this much. I had never looked further into it, because it wasn't my business. Now I made it my business. I spent that evening reading public property records, the county assessor's database, the trust documentation my grandfather had filed, which, because it was recorded at the county level, was partially accessible. What I found made me sit very still. The trust had a clause, a fairly standard one in older family trusts. It stated that any sale or transfer of the property required agreement from both beneficiaries, my mother and my uncle. Neither could act unilaterally. But there was a second document filed 18 months ago. A petition to have my uncle's interest administratively transferred to my mother, on the grounds that he was a non-resident and had been unreachable. 18 months ago. 1 month before she called me and said my father wasn't well and asked me to come home. I thought about that timeline for a long time. I requested the full filing through the county records portal. Standard public request, 3 to 5 business days. Then I did one more thing. I called my uncle. He and I had never been close. He's a quiet man. Lives in Portugal now. We'd exchanged maybe a dozen messages in the past 5 years. But I had his number. He answered on the third ring. I didn't mention the house immediately. I asked how he was. He seemed genuinely surprised to hear from me. We talked for a few minutes. Then I asked, casually, if he'd heard from my mother recently. He went quiet. Then he said, she told me the house was going to a developer. She said the family had all agreed. He said she'd sent him paperwork to sign. He said he hadn't signed it yet. He said he'd been waiting to hear from someone in the family first, anyone, to confirm. No one had called him. Until now. I told him not to sign anything. I told him I would explain everything soon. I kept my voice level the entire call. When I hung up, I sat quietly for a moment. Then I went downstairs, said goodnight to my parents, and went to bed. Confronting them would have ruined everything. The county records arrived on a Thursday. I had them sent to my email, digital copies, officially certified. I downloaded them twice. Saved them to cloud storage under a folder with a name that meant nothing to anyone but me. Then I printed 2 sets at the library 3 blocks from the house, not at home. I sealed one set in an envelope and mailed it to myself at a P.O. box I opened that same afternoon. The other set I kept in my car, in a folder between old receipts and a road atlas nobody looks at. I was not panicking. I want to be clear about that. I was organizing. There's a difference. The records confirmed what I suspected. The petition to transfer my uncle's share had been filed quietly, with a legal notice posted, as required by law, in a local print newspaper, with a circulation of roughly 400 people. My uncle, living in Portugal, had never seen it. The petition had been granted by default, 60 days after filing, because no objection was received. That default transfer was the foundation of everything my mother had planned. And it had one significant problem. My uncle had never been properly notified. The law requires diligent effort to locate a beneficiary before proceeding by publication. There was no evidence of that effort in the record. No certified mail attempts. No documented search. Just a single legal notice in a newspaper that had no reason to reach a man living abroad. That was enough. I called a property attorney on a Friday morning from my car, parked 2 streets away. I had found her through the State Bar's referral directory. She specialized in trust and estate disputes. I told her I had a time-sensitive situation involving a fraudulent trust transfer and a potential property sale. She asked me to send the documents before our call the following Monday. I sent them that afternoon. She called me Sunday evening instead. She said, "This is more serious than you described." She walked me through it calmly. The improper notification alone was grounds to challenge the transfer. But there was a second layer. The developer sale my mother had been moving toward, the preliminary contract, which my attorney had located through a separate public filing, had been signed with only my mother's authorization. If my uncle's transfer was voided, that contract was built on a fraudulent ownership claim. I asked her what we could do. She told me. I retained her that evening by email. Signed the agreement, paid the retainer from savings I had kept in an account my parents knew nothing about. My mother thought I kept everything in one place. I had learned, a long time ago, to be quieter than people expected. My attorney filed an emergency motion to halt any property transfer pending a review of the trust modification. Because the developer contract was already in the public record, she had grounds to move quickly. The motion went in on Tuesday morning. My uncle signed a supporting affidavit the same day. He had been waiting. When I explained everything to him fully, he was not shocked. He was tired, and a little sad, and entirely cooperative. He said he should have asked more questions 18 months ago. I told him it wasn't his fault. Meanwhile, at home, nothing changed. My mother made dinner. My father watched television. They spoke to me normally. My mother reminded me twice that week that she and my father needed the house to themselves soon. She framed it gently, like a reasonable conversation. She said she hoped I was making plans. She said they'd give me a little more time if I needed it. I said I appreciated that. I was polite. I was calm. I helped carry in the groceries on Tuesday. I fixed a loose hinge on the back gate that my father had mentioned. They thought nothing was wrong. My attorney was waiting for confirmation that the motion had been received and flagged. My uncle had retained his own counsel in parallel. The developer's legal team had gone quiet, which my attorney said meant they'd seen the filing and were now asking their own client some difficult questions. Everything was in place. I remember the night before very clearly. I sat in my car in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. It was cold. The house looked warm from the outside, lights on in the kitchen, the blue flicker of the television in the front room. I sat there and I thought about the 14 months I'd spent inside those walls. The appointments. The groceries. The exhaust fan. The 7 boxes by the front door on Christmas morning. Then I went inside, said goodnight, and slept better than I had in weeks. They thought it was just another day. It wasn't. The attorney came to the house on a Wednesday morning. Not alone. She brought a colleague, a younger man, who carried a leather folder and said very little. A sheriff's deputy arrived separately, not dramatically, not with lights. He parked at the curb and waited. His presence was procedural. A requirement given the nature of the filing. He was there to ensure the process was orderly, nothing more. I had timed it for 10 a.m. My father would be awake. My mother would have finished her coffee. No one would be disoriented. I didn't want chaos. I specifically did not want chaos. I opened the front door before they knocked. My mother came into the hallway and stopped. She looked at the woman standing in her doorway, in a dark coat holding a legal satchel. Then she looked at me. Her expression didn't collapse all at once. It happened in stages, recognition, then calculation, then something quieter than either of those. Something that looked almost like relief, and I've thought about that since. My father appeared behind her. My attorney introduced herself by name and firm. She was courteous. She explained that she was there on behalf of a co-beneficiary of the property trust, and that she had documents requiring acknowledgement. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. My mother said, "You can't be here." My attorney said, "We have every right to be here." And she said it so evenly, so without friction, that there was simply nothing to push against. We moved to the kitchen table. My attorney laid out 3 documents. She explained each one without rushing. The first was the court's confirmation that the default transfer of my uncle's share had been voided, improper notification, insufficient diligent search, granted 2 days prior. The second was a cease and further action notice directed at the developer contract, which was now the subject of a formal fraud review given that it had been executed on the basis of sole ownership that did not legally exist. The third document was a recorded affidavit from my uncle, his name, his signature, his statement that he had not been properly informed of any proceedings, and had not consented to the transfer of his interest. My mother sat very still through all of this. My father asked one question. He asked if the house was going to be taken from them. My attorney said no. She said the house remained in the family trust, equally, as it had always been intended. She said no sale could proceed without the agreement of both beneficiaries. She said my uncle had no interest in forcing a sale. She said the developer contract was void and that the developer's own counsel had already begun withdrawing from the arrangement. My father nodded slowly. He folded his hands on the table. My mother didn't speak for a long time. Then she looked at me and said, "You did this." I said, "I protected the property. The way I was supposed to." That was all I said. There were follow-on consequences that unfolded over the following weeks. My mother's attorney, the one who had drafted my occupancy termination notice, the one who had filed the original petition, faced a separate inquiry from the state bar regarding the notification procedures. I did not file that complaint. My uncle's attorney did. I mention it only because it happened. The developer pursued a brief claim against my mother personally for misrepresentation. It was settled quietly. I don't know the terms. That was not my business, and I didn't make it my business. My uncle and I spoke several more times after. He is a careful, measured man. He thanked me in a way that felt genuine and uncomfortable for both of us, and we agreed to stay in better contact. We have. As for my parents, I moved out 6 weeks later. Not because I was asked. Because I had found a place, signed a lease, and was ready. I told them a week before I left. My mother made dinner that last evening. We ate without discussing any of it. My father said to drive safe when I left. I did. I don't carry what happened as something to be proud of exactly. I carry it as something I had to do, carefully, quietly, without losing myself in the anger that was always available to me and that I chose not to use. The house is still in the trust. As it should be. As my grandparents intended. I have a lease in my own name, a job I never gave up, and a savings account nobody else knows about. I kept the certified documents. All of them. Still stored in that same cloud folder with the unremarkable name, still sealed in the envelope at the P.O. box, still in the folder in my car between the receipts and the road atlas. Old habits. I drove home the night it was over, my new home, the apartment with the second-hand couch, and the window that faces east, and I made tea and I sat down, and I didn't call anyone. There was nothing left to do. That night, everything was quiet.